I already forgot to let you know to record. So before we begin, I just wanted to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded, as Zoom is telling you all now. If you are uncomfortable with your name, voice, or face being in any of this video, you are more welcome to change your name to hide that and just not turn on your video camera and or speak into the microphone during questions. So let's begin. Once again, thank you guys all so much for being here and welcome to Reef Check Australia's Coastal Corals lectures online edition. This has been running for well over 10 years now. I think we're up to 14 or 15 years, I think. So thank you all for joining to continue the tradition. So I want to begin with acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which both I'm on and everyone within Australia. I reside, live, work and play in the Sunshine Coast, which is home to the Gubbi Gubbi people, as well as the Yinabara people a little bit further inland. And we just want to pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to tonight's event of Saving Sawfish and talking about utilizing citizen science to protect endangered and critically endangered species with the wonderful Nikki Biskis, PhD candidate at the University of the Sunshine Coast. So before we get into it, I just wanted to, in case anyone doesn't know, go through who Reef Check Australia is. So we're a non-for-profit organisation that's based all around the globe, but Reef Check Oz, as you can imagine, is just within Australia. So we train scuba divers to go out and learn how to collect scientific data. We also engage the community and empower them with educational material on conservation and climate change mitigation techniques to try and help through a grassroots level get people to understand how they can reduce their impact on our lovely oceans. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you just were to please keep your video off for the remainder of the lecture and mute yourself as well throughout this entire call, that would be wonderful, please. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat box to just ask a question and I can interrupt Nikki. Otherwise, you're welcome to, if Nikki's okay with it, just unmute yourself and ask. And we normally do a group photo, either before or after. Maybe we can do it after. I normally like after, it's quite funner. So again, if you're uncomfortable being in the group photo, please just don't turn on your Zoom camera, and if you don't want your name there, just change it. So there are a couple upcoming community engagement and conservation events going on around Queensland. The first being Piranha Fest. It's a wellness retreat in the Sunshine Coast that Reef Check is the primary sponsor for, and we do actually have a free ticket up for grabs if you're interested in volunteering with Reef Check Australia, or if you are an ambassador already. If you're keen on that, please comment and we'll provide you a little more details about it. But it's worth $300 to $500. It's a multi-day kind of festival that has lots of live acts, as well as some really interactive workshops on making you feel a whole lot better in life. So the Logan Eco Action Festival is on the same Sunday as well, which is just a community environmental event down in Logan. If you're down that way, that's at the Griffith University from 9 to 3. And on the same day, up in Townsville, we've got another Eco Fiesta or Eco Fest. It's again a lot of community stores. Reef Check will also be there as well. And it's from 9 AM to 3 PM at this address as well. We have Queensland Landcare Awards on at 5 different locations. all across Queensland. And these guys kind of like to illuminate local legends and community groups, such as Reef Check Australia. We've been nominated for an award, and that's coming up in just under 2 weeks from 11 a.m. till 12:30. You can hop online to register to be there in person or online. And we do have a plastic-free July event, which is just before July begins on June, which is in the Sunshine Coast at Beach Access 233, Cooper's Lookout. It's just near Kawana Surf Club if you're a local here. It's from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. and it's run by Visionary Ocean Warrior. We normally go to this event. It's really, really awesome. You go and do a beach cleanup, and in return, there's some free upcycled bags that you get, as well as sometimes we have thrift stores that donate clothes and you can go thrifting for free, which is really incredible as well. If you're interested in it, just Google Plastic Free Sea, Visionary Ocean Warrior, and some info on either the Sunny Coast Council or their Facebook page come up. If you are interested in becoming a volunteer, I highly recommend it. I've been volunteering with Reef Check Oz for 5 to 6 years now, and it's been absolutely wonderful. If you are a scuba diver, we train people, as I mentioned earlier, in becoming a citizen science survey diver. But if you're not and you're just keen on marine conservation and getting to know more about coral reefs, we also have an ambassador training program as well, where we do exactly that. And as always, if you're interested in learning more about us, our website's down here. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, I don't think TikTok, but everything else. And I wanted to thank the various different collaborators and stakeholders that support us to be who we are, Reef Check Australia. We wouldn't be able to operate with all of the wonderful help that everyone gives us, from Sunny Coast, Gold Coast, Townsville, Brisbane, and tonight Sarah, who are Sharks and Rays Australia, who are also another wonderful community organization that do a lot of really great research, such as the one we're about to hear tonight. And I also wanted to thank all of the volunteers we do already have. These amazing people are just some of the wonderful Reef Check Australia team. It really does take a village. On top of all the sponsors we have, Reef Check Oz wouldn't be here without the amazing team leaders we have and volunteers. So thank you. So now that that's all out of the way, Jodie's commented with some info on Piranha Fest if anyone was interested in that. It's time to introduce the wonderful Nikki that everyone here is for. So Nikki is a PhD candidate at the University of the Sunshine Coast. She's predominantly down at the Fraser Coast campus, working under Professor Kathy Townsend and Dr. Bonnie Holmes, as well as Dr. Barbara Weringer. I probably am pronouncing that wrong. Sorry, Barbara, of Sharks and Rays Australia. So her work involves tying together some really fun field work up in the Wenlock River, which is some remote river systems up in Cape York, with citizen science and historical ecological data to do some mathematical modeling to model their distribution. She received her bachelor's from Carnegie Mellon University, probably mispronouncing that as well, sorry Nikki, and she did a master's at Boston University for medicine. And as you can tell, she's from America, so before she moved over to Australia, she split her time working as a director of a high school in California, as well as volunteering within a paleontology lab in the San Diego Museum. So without further ado, we'll throw it over to you, Nikki.
Awesome. Thanks, Pablo. I'll just share my screen. And can everyone see this okay?
Yep, that's good.
Yeah. Sweet. Okay, cool. Awesome. And then I'll just hide all of your faces so I don't get freaked out. I still get nervous talking after all this time. But yeah, so my name is Nikki and I'm a PhD student, like Pop said for me. And I work with Sharks and Rays Australia and the University of Sunshine Coast. So first of all, thank you all for coming. I'll be talking to you about our Australian sawfishes and how we use citizen science data in a contemporary distribution assessment in Queensland. Okay, cool. So first of all, of course, acknowledgement of country. I'm coming from you today from Kapi lands where my university stands. I live on Butchulla country, and much of this work was conducted in far north Queensland on country. Some of the amazing groups that we work with are listed here. And a huge component of this project really, it depend on the people that are on the ground every day. I say it all the time, but without their ongoing support, none of this work would be possible whatsoever. So I'm going to start out by talking to you all a bit about why we even need distribution assessment. Oh, can we not hear it? Sorry? Maybe somebody's just not muted.
Yeah, I just muted them, sorry.
Oh, good, cool. I thought that I was doing something wrong. No worries. So anyway, like I said, yeah, why do we need distribution assessments? So it really starts with the key drivers. So we've got, human population growth. We know there's a number of impacts like pollution, habitat destruction, but today we're going to focus on fisheries. So following the industrialization of fishing, we have, an increase of vessel power efficiency due to an increased demand of food. So not only do we have more people on Earth, but also we're eating a lot more fish. And due in part to a lack of gear selectivity, we've got an increase of bycatch, so your non-target species. And they potentially make up anywhere between 25 and 40% of global catch. And it's frequently unreported. In general, historic reporting is pretty poor, but for bycatch species, it's far worse. And poor reporting has a number of negative consequences. We don't know what's going on in the populations we're taking from. And this is, of course, detrimental to management of marine food resources, but it's really important historically. And I think the study in particularly highlights the impact that archival data can show us. So everything's relative, right? To what we can conceptualize based on our own life experiences. But when population declines have occurred before we were born or before real record keeping, this gives us an underestimation of our impact. And I could pick any of the species here on this slide, and I'll do a new one today. But if you look at here over at blue sharks on the left, the y-axis represents that percent change, and the x is years of data included. So over the last 21 years, blue sharks have declined around, 35%. But if you're looking at abundance records from 50 or more years, you can see that they've dropped to actually really over 90. And this changes things, right? That rate of decline would suggest that there's less than 10% left, which triggers a critically endangered listing. Unfortunately, that's not unique amongst blue sharks. Our chondrichthyans, or shark rays and chimeras, are often threatened with extinction, as this paper from 2021 shows us. So this is in part due to their reproductive strategies, which tend to include things like late age at maturity, a low number of offspring, they live long, and having a larger body size means that you've got more or bigger pups, right? So this reproductive strategy would lead to a higher likelihood of reaching maturity, but having less offspring less often would mean that you're less likely to be replaced in a population. So they're extremely susceptible to the consequences of fishing. And in addition, there's this case of size selective harvesting. In other words, taking the biggest individuals. And it really makes sense from an economic standpoint why someone would want to do that. You get more money per your fishing effort, but that also means you're removing the big breeders, right? Which decreases the reproductive potential of those populations. This study, which I love, found that there are a number of other factors that lead to trade-driven extinction risk. And so in addition to large size, if the part that's being harvested can be preserved, that's even more valuable. And that's because it can be ground up like a powder, like shark fins or rhino horn, or be kept as a trophy. So you can get more money per piece. right? And this effect is true across trophy species. It was found regardless of fines. And in fact, globally, it was estimated that they'd have to be about 10 times higher to curb the trade. And this is where we get to sawfishes. So as you can see in the photo on the left, this was caught off of Townsville in 1961. It's about 6.5 meters. It's a freshwater sawfish. They get massive, right? And that's one of those big factors. And even though they're protected, saws are still being taken today. So this is a paper that we put out last year with Sharks and Rays Australia. It's an in-depth analysis on the species composition shift in Queensland that you can see across the trophy saws over time. And as a recap, sawfishes fall into this perfect storm that I've outlined, right? So they're under threat due to historic overfishing. They've got the huge individuals, which of course make them at higher risk. Historically poor reporting because they are caught as bycatch. And one I haven't really touched on yet, something we see across rare and threatened species is severe habitat fragmentation. So that presents really logistical challenges for ongoing assessment. If you're limited to these tiny remote pockets now that you've receded basically away from where people are, that makes it expensive and very labor intensive to travel to. Right. So even though you can see, this is a map that I'm so happy I got to use again. I made it a very long time ago. We've got 4 species of sawfishes here. So theoretically, pretty wide current distribution, but within that, very, very separated. And we'll talk more about that. So internationally, 5 species have receded from over 59% of their historic range. And they were actually the first of any chondriichthyans to be protected on the IUCN Red List back in 2007. But what about domestically? So after that, that triggered an EPBC listing in 2009. They were protected in Australia. The multi-species recovery plan was put in place in 2015, and genetic studies and field monitoring have since been ongoing, but not evenly distributed, right? And so I'll show you what I mean by that. We've got insights into habitat use through tracking, genetic studies that can see how many distinct populations there are in Northern Australia to better manage them, looking at growth and morphology, how they're acting around habitat development, and even recently commercial catch rates. But you might notice some trends across these papers. By no means always the case. The majority of these studies are in a select few river systems, namely in WA, often nursery areas, and mostly the Pristis genus. And this is a figure from the multi-species recovery plan that I talked about earlier. You can see over here the Fitzroy River off to the left. If you've seen a Sawfish TV special, it was probably shot there. But there's actually a huge range of where sawfish are known or thought to be. And many are very difficult to get to, especially inaccessible in the wet season. And in Queensland, where we had a lot of that range, a lot of really important habitat, regardless of that, there outside of government reports, there's really only this study at the top right, the Gulf of Carpentaria from '05, and Barbara, one of my supervisors, her paper on historic catches along the East Coast. And that's it really for distribution assessments. So clearly there's a need to understand more of what's going on here. So that leads me to the aims of this study. So it's to identify contemporary hotspots in Queensland and assess potential shifts in your species distributions, both temporally and spatially. That temporal range between 92 and 2022 is 15 years either side of protection. And spatially, I wanted to look at that because I wanted to figure out what areas we need to focus on conservation-wise. And then 3, identify those key drivers of any range shifts. So I love this picture. Sharks and Rays Australia has been collected this data for over 10 years now. And this is actually how I got my start with SARA. I was working as an intern in 2018 on this display case project that was funded by Save Our Seas Foundation and the Queensland Office of the Queensland Chief Scientist. And we've got over 70 locations where we built these and sent them all over Australia. You don't have to, of course, read through all of this, but I'd like to draw your attention to the green specifically. So it was important for us to basically hit every single roadhouse on the way from Cairns to the tip, so that if you're a visiting recreational fisher headed north, you're forced to see these displays and learn all about sawfishes, why they're so important, and how to release them safely and report your sighting. In addition to that, SAR works with the Indigenous Land and Sea Rangers on country, like I said earlier. They learn our sampling methods, and they will continue to independently sample and then survey, monitor these populations year round, like I said, when we can't get to it because of the wet. This is what our reporting website looks like. It's a very simple form that collects important information like location, size, bait. It's very quick and easy to use. People send in things like this, so both recent and historic photos, like this one taken in Baffle Creek, as well as photos of saws. So we get them sent all the time from like the wall of a pub or a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. And from that, we can actually ID the species and determine that total length without even having the entire body. And this is a little bit how we do that. This paper is currently in review, and it's now just hitting me how absolutely wild it is to see such a big chunk of my life reduced to one slide. It's making me emotional. But we determine the best relationships to estimate the total length of the animal from the saw alone. And that's important for determining size associated risk with the various skiers. And like I said earlier, as a proxy for decline. I mentioned that we know that size reduction is directly related to the decline of reproductive potential, right? So that means that you can make a lot more inferences about these animals from the saws alone. So let's look at our Australian sawfish species. We've got 4 here. Now they've recently, a couple have been uplisted, so they're all critically endangered. And there's some key identifying features that I want to point out. There will be a quiz on this later. So on the 2 species on the right, you can see a forked tail, though that's not true in the green sawfish and the dwarfs. In freshwater sawfish, they're unique in that the dorsal fin sits in front of those pelvic fins. So even if you can't see the saw, that can usually give away that you've got that species. Another thing we look at is how big the saw is compared to the body. So your green sawfish have by far the longest saw to their body ratio. It makes up almost up to a third. I think that I've seen ones where it's like 38% of their bodies. They have a massive saw. Meanwhile, you got dwarfs, which are the opposite. They're named that not because they don't get big, they can still get 5 meters, but their saw is really stubby compared to their body. Another thing you can look at with the saws is in an oxypristis, you can see the teeth don't go all the way to the end, so they're more towards the tip. And you can look at the distribution of the teeth in the other ones too. So in greens, you see really close together at the top and then spreading out as you go towards the bottom, whereas in dwarfs and freshwater, they're pretty even, but the saws are kind of tapered at the top and then wider at the bottom. And this one really gives it away. In freshwater sawfish, they're unique that you've got an extra large gap between your first and second teeth. So even if you just see that, like, cool, I got a freshie. I wasn't kidding. I actually have a quiz in here. So I'm going to open this up to the room. You can pop it in the chat or unmute yourself. I don't care. What species is this? What do we think?
It doesn't have an extra large gap, so I don't know which one it is.
Yep, it's not a freshwater sawfish. Nope, true. It's got a very thin and long saw.
Alice says green.
Yeah, it's green. That's it.
Oh,
Yeah. So it's really crazy, especially in the juveniles, how big it really looks compared to the body. So yeah, you got a greenie there. Nice. What about this one? What is that? I'm now realizing I should have had like a photo of all of them next to them in case you didn't recognize the species names. Does anybody know?
Bo says narrow.
Yeah, it's an arrow.
Oh,
I
good
think they're the
job.
weirdest because yeah, they look all bug-eyed and kind of ugly in a cute way, like a pug. So I adore them. They're the least studied out of the 4, and they're in their own genus. And they're also the only one I haven't seen in the wild. So like maybe that's why I love them so much. Very good. Now I just got a saw. So if you don't have the body, you just got the saw. Oh, it's very long. Okay, it also helps probably if I tell you how big it is. This was like a 1.5 meters, the saw. Long and skinny. I can't see the chat. Sorry, Pops. You're gonna have to say it.
Alice says the far left one. She can't remember the name.
It's
Also.
yeah, it is. It's the green again. Nice. Yeah, it's another green
Oh,
sawfish.
it's green.
Yep. And then we're getting a little tricky here. So this is a little guy. They're pretty close together. This actually threw a couple experts too. So if you can get it, you're smarter than some people that spent their lives focusing on these.
Joanna says green again.
It looks almost like a green. A lot of people think that it's a green,
I
but
can
it
see.
is not. It's a
Oh,
dwarf. Yes, it
it's a
is. It is a
dwarf.
dwarf. Yeah,
Really?
it's a dwarfy. Yeah. So he's this when they're really little, and this is actually part of one of the things that's in the paper that's coming out soon, hopefully. But when they're small, and I didn't even tell you this, so it's not fair. But the saw is longer compared to the body, and then they kind of grow into it. So they look a bit more like a green sawfish when they are juveniles, but it's actually a dwarf. And this one, just want to point out, if you look over here at the weird teeth at the front.
That's your fresh.
You got
Yeah, I love the confidence
fresh.
actually yelling it out. Yes, very good. It's a freshwater sawfish. Yeah, so a lot of times you get photos like this where like half of it's submerged. There's ones where you can't, like I said, you can't even see the teeth, but if you could tell that this fin is in front of these ones as well, which also gives away it's a freshwater sawfish. Plus the murky water helps too. What about that?
Can I ask a question, sorry, before
Yeah, go
we
for it.
move on to this cute little guy? Why ecologically do they have that little gap on the tip of their saw?
You know what?
Do
We
you,
don't know
do you know?
that. There's been a lot of work on the width of the tooth, like with Anoxipristis versus the other three species. So they've got like flat, wider teeth versus long, pointy teeth. So they've looked at the tooth wear on those guys, and then they've compared the length of the saw versus how much force they have behind it, which is pretty cool too. But no one has specifically looked at those teeth and why they're further away. I do know that with sawfish, they mainly hunt with the front of their saw, which is why with Anoxipristis, it makes sense to have all of your teeth kind of at the end, right? Like that's where you get the most torque at the front. But why you would need an extra wide space between your first and second tooth, I don't know. Good question. But yeah, back to this weird dude. What's he? Nice. Yeah, so I mean, it's not a sawfish at all. It's a saw shark. Whenever we get people sending in photos from Victoria or South Australia, I have to tell them that they sent me something that's not endangered, but still very cute, and I appreciate them. But that's what this is a saw shark. So you can tell they are actual sharks. They've got their gills on the side, not underneath. They've got these funny little barbels, and they don't get very big. Not that that doesn't mean they're not important, but they don't get 7 meters. They're like a meter and a half. So
Can
what do
I
I do?
ask another question? Sorry,
Yeah.
hate to be annoying. Did they, uh, was it convergence? Did
Ah,
you both form something but outside of the same branch, evolutionarily speaking?
yeah. So oh man, I'm gonna forget this off the top of my head. If Barbara's here, she'll know the answer. I can't tell if she is. But I believe saws have evolved separately, either 3 or 4 times in the record, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So definitely, yeah, just convergent evolution. So, onto the methods. Sarah collects data on all sharks and rays people send in, like I just showed you that cute little saw shark. And I filter that to just include sawfishes in Queensland in that 30-year time frame. Then I use GIS or mapping software, for those that don't know, from publicly available environmental population and fishing data. And I pulled really important information from associated with each point. Then I ran a number of analyses, and we're going to focus on 4-ish today. Number one, IDing those hotspots. So where are they now? 2, has there been any shift in where they're being reported from in that time frame? 3, are we seeing any impact of size or release state of the sawfishes over time? And then finally 4, if so, what are the key factors that lead to this? And so to date, we've got over almost 1,500 sightings in the database. And what you can see here in this map, this is just a distribution of sightings throughout time is a very strong recency bias, right? And that's in part due to the advent of camera phones, one, but also because of how long the campaign has been going. So it began in 2016. And so you can see here, that's what this line represents. That's where the submissions really start ramping up. People can report older things, and that's how we got all of those, but mostly from that date forward. Then after we had a media release here in 2018, and then something really weird happened in 2020. I can't think of what that is. All of a sudden we got a drop in sightings. Strange. And so of those 1,400 reports, we've got 655 were sawfishes from Queensland. We had over 1,200 of sawfishes overall, but the rest are in WA or Northern Territory. And then of those, 361 were associated with a capture location between the dates that I was interested in. So our first result are the hotspots. So I don't have time to delve into all of these species, plus they're not all done. But I got freshwater sawfish here as an example. And so a couple things I want to highlight. One, this spot up here represents Weipa and Mapoon. Pablo had mentioned earlier the Wenlock River, so that's that area there. And it's actually a really important location for all 4 species. So we see a hotspot there for all of them. And as far as like range shifts go, there was no significant difference in density pre and post protection. So on either side of that protection date for narrows or for dwarfs. But we did see an eastward shift in range reporting for both greens and for freshwater sawfishes. And that's partly due to our outreach and where we do our field work. So for freshwater sawfish and greens, we saw a lot of them more in the Gulf of Carpentaria prior to protection, and lesser being reported from there now. We can see that we've got this big hotspot in Rainier Lakefield National Park. That's because we do a lot of work there with freshwater sawfish. And then along the East Coast, we've expanded our field work and we're getting lots more greens down there. And you can see here, yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Joanna has asked why Pristis, if there's any particular reason why Pristis P has a small amount of data compared to the others. I think she
A
was
smaller,
referring to
Pristis has less data?
Does it? If you go back one slide,
Oh, sure.
P Pristis.
Pre-Pristis,
And
no, it's got heaps. Yeah, especially around here. So the
no,
size.
sorry, she's asking about Pristis P. Pristis
Oh,
SP.
SP. Okay. So Pristis SP just means that we know that it's a pristid species. So it's one of clavata greens or freshwater, but we can't tell you which of the 4 it is. So it's not its own species. That just means like it's unknown. Yeah, so usually that's because no matter how good I've gotten at identifying things by staring at photos, something is off, like the tip of the saw might be cut off, or sadly, sometimes we get them reported without a saw, or it's like you can only see some of the fin. Yeah, we can't tell exactly what it is. I can usually tell from size, of course, that it's not a Noxipristis because it's so uniquely different, but I can't narrow it down between those 3. That's all I should have mentioned as well. Pristidae is just the family. So again, I know it's a sawfish, but I can't tell you exactly which species. And I should have mentioned as well, this picture really highlights the importance of longitudinal studies and why we need an Australia-wide database for collecting these data. And obviously, you get more abundance post protection, right? So you have to be creative with looking at assessing decline, because you get that big question: are there more reports because there's more sawfish, or more people that are reporting, right? And that's always the case with citizen science data. And you can really see that here too, right? So are there more freshwater sawfish over there on the East Coast than there used to be, or just now we're actually interacting with them? And the same thing goes with greens along the East Coast, right? And so that's why I didn't really use abundance data in our estimates of what's happening over time. It's really useful to look at what's happening with citizen science, but instead wanted to look at trends in size. And what's really sad here that you can see is that we have a significant decline for all, we ran a linear regression, all but significant, in only a span of 30 years across all species. So the total length is decreasing over time. That effect is highest across P. pristis, our freshwater sawfish, and it's the least for Noxipristis cuspidata. And I could put this to the room, I guess, since we like asking questions. Can anybody guess why you might see more decline in some species versus others, like our Pristis species? what are the things that make people kill them?
Oh, we've got an answer. Let me check. Trophy value.
Yeah.
Same as what I'm thinking. The bigger
Yeah.
the saw, the better.
Absolutely. So greens have the largest saw to body ratio, like I said earlier. So people love taking those historically. Freshwater sawfish, they can be pretty big and massive. I mean, they don't get as long, but they're like also very wide. Anoxipristis, it just doesn't get as big. So that species only gets up to like 4 meters, and really rarely. They're most often around like 3. And they don't, so that saw just isn't as big or impressive. A lot of what I do is looking at historic records, which I'm not focusing on today, but I've seen some funny newspaper articles that are like, ugh, this, we killed this beautiful animal. And I'm really disappointed because the saw was lame. Like they're actually criticizing the trophy that they took, which is ridiculous. So yeah, so that's probably what's happening here. And so then I ran generalized linear models and found that the days netted, so the amount of fishing effort that's associated in that grid location, and the region that's caught were significant predictors of the size decline. And then in addition to that, I also looked at what that means for the ages that we have. So Pebberell's paper from 2005 created basically an age model, so looking at how big the old the animals would be based on their total length. And so you can see here that there's a shift away from maturity, which is in these dotted lines. So for Anoxipristis, the mean was sitting around, or median was sitting around the age of maturity, and then post protection, we really don't have any. They're underneath it. And then for our greens, we did have, again, it was around the length of maturity, but now they're all underneath it. So it's not just that they're getting smaller. We don't have mature individuals very often being reported currently. And so after that, I looked at, okay, great, that's one thing, size. What about fate? So what about whether or not they have a chance of being released alive or dead? And so basically, Barbara called this a choose your own adventure. So depending on where you're born and what you're caught with determines what you're going to be alive or dead if you're a sawfish. So if caught on a cast net or a line, it really depends on how big the animal is. So if they were smaller than 2.5 meters, always released alive. So that's the gray here. And if it's bigger, then there's about a 20% chance that it would be killed and collected. If caught by a gill net or a trawl, basically, if under or sort of before 2005, always killed. After 2005, it depends on the location. So if in central Queensland, dead. And we have recent reports of a lot of sawfishes being killed in central Queensland. And then if it's one of these other locations, so Gulf of Carpentaria, Western Cape York, up where that hotspot was I mentioned earlier, and Northeast Queensland, about a 25 to 30% chance of being dead. And so I have here some photos from our database, but yeah, so you've got these little guys being released, caught on a line, as well as larger ones, stand a good chance of being released alive. But then along the East Coast, these are both from central Queensland. They're both from Mackay. This is one that was washed up dead. And then this one was posted to a fishing group. It had its saw cut off and then thrown back, and it didn't die. But that just means that they're going to slowly, starve to death because they don't have a way of feeding themselves over the next several months. However, we've got some feel-good stories in here as well. This is a sawfish from the Gulf of Carpentaria that was caught in a net, discarded net. And then these guys from this fishing charter outfit actually spent like hours releasing it and trying to get it to swim away. You can also see just how there's a green sawfish. They get pretty big, like I mentioned earlier, and they go very, very shallow, so a high chance of interacting with people. And then this is where we are now. So this analysis isn't complete yet, but it's the next steps that I wanted to show you. So to model how these factors have affected our hotspots and to use them to predict where we should be finding sawfishes and focusing our efforts further. So if you're headed to AMSA in September, you'll get to hear all about this because I will hopefully be done with that. But I'm looking at, the environmental protection area, how many mean net days are associated with the catch, and then the effective human population density. So In summary, this is one of my favorite photos that anyone's ever submitted because it's a wild way to pose with a sawfish. But citizen science data was able to build on these distribution analyses in Queensland. And in the absence of abundance data, size and fate can serve as indicators of the trends and what's happening in these populations. Contemporary sawfish populations are still suffering due to commercial pressure, and outreach and education should be focused on central Queensland in particular. And then further analyses are going to compare predictors of presence in various locations according to environmental factors and our anthropomorphic impacts. Yeah, so and then of course I've got a happy release of a sawfish here. So happy to take any questions. I am sorry if I went too fast. I thought I was going to talk for like 30, 40 minutes, but I don't think I did.
Nikki, I've just got one question. Why are they more often dead in central Queensland than North Queensland? Is that just because they're useless fishes in central Queensland?
That's the question, right? So it's always tricky when you have a sawfish wash up without a saw because you don't know what killed it. So there's times where we get sawfishes that are like, you can literally see them caught in an illegal net, so you know exactly what happened to them. And that has happened in central Queensland as well. To be fair, it happens not just there, it happens in other places too. It just seems to be happening there a lot. But I think what we're seeing is it's a lot of interaction with people because you've got a higher population density there than you do in the rest of the range. Like that kind of represents towards the southern end of their range, at least for greens. So they're not found south of Mackay in our database. And it's not the case for Noxipristis. They go down as far south potentially as Harvey Bay. So people are, of course, not really used to catching them. They might not know what to do with it when they do catch them. Yeah, so I think education is a big thing that needs to happen there, and we are starting field work in those areas. But maybe, and also it's tricky if you catch a big animal in a net. Like, how are you going to get it out without hurting yourself? So it might just be people self-preservation a bit too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We've got a million great talks, very informative from everyone. So great talk, very informative. We've got a couple questions, if I can find them. Bo asks, have they been bred in captivity?
Oh yeah. So there have been attempts. So I don't know if the one in Singapore was successful. I want to say it's not. They take a very long time. I didn't talk about this too much, but they take a very long time to reach sexual maturity. So your 3 Pristis species take anywhere from 8 to 10 years. And then your Noxipristis takes like 2-ish years, 2 to 2.5, depending if it's male or female. And so of the Pristis species, it takes a long time to get them to that stage. They have to be in captivity for quite a lot of time. And then now you're not allowed to collect them anymore, right? So in the past, like Hans Marine, for example, would collect sawfishes from the Gulf and then send them to aquaria. And they actually do pretty well. They just kind of sit, right? They're a ray, not a shark. But we're not, they're not collecting them any longer. So I know that they were trying to breed some of them down in the Melbourne Aquarium, but I believe one of them died. So that can't happen now. So it's tricky because you have to go out and collect more, but you want to leave them in the population. So they're not doing that.
Fair enough, thank you. Next question from Joanna. Do you have ongoing active conservation efforts on top of all of this wonderful research that's is doing?
Yeah. So whenever we go out, we always, and we're very lucky to be funded by a number of grants that we've been applying for over the last several years. So we've got a Great Barrier Reef Foundation grant, as well as a Queensland Engaging Science grant. So whenever we're out doing field work, we will run the community events and do outreach to people there and how important it is to release these animals. That's what we did last time we were down in Mackay. And so we do that everywhere we go. I know Barbara just ran one when she was up in Weipa as well. I did one last year in Cohen. We flew in and we worked with all the rangers, a lot of times with the kids. So we teach them about like how a food web works and why sawfishes is so important. And then mainly like, yeah, how can you help as a scientist, right? So how do you ID a sawfish? What happens if you catch one? And then how can you get involved? In addition to doing that, we do also take people out in the field. So if you go to SAR's website, which I should have put here, I've got our social media, which is great because you can find it there on any of those platforms. But
I can put one in the chat if you like.
yeah, cool. But you can go to www.saw.fish. I think it's the coolest website name that's ever existed. But we've got all of our field dates up for the year. We've got a big project going in Rinuru Lakefield National Park. So we'll take people out there. We're setting acoustic receivers and we're tagging sawfish. So we're seeing how they're using that that river system. And that's also collaborative with a lot of groups too that can use that array for tracking other species as well. So there's an opportunity to get hands-on experience working with SARA.
Very cool. And that answered another question of, do you have any conservation programs with the populations where the hotspots are, you found? I think you answered yes to some of them.
Yep.
Cool. Let's find another question. You've got a lot of questions, Vicky. People love this.
That's all right.
What's the typical lifespan? Alice would like to know.
Oh, it depends on your species. So do I know these off the top of my head? I think sadly I do. It's like remembering all your unnecessary song lyrics. So for an Oxypristis, they're estimated to live about like 35 years. So they reproduce a lot faster. And what I haven't really shown you is, because I didn't focus on them today, although I really had the time, they are more distributed further south, and then there seem to be a lot more numbers of them. So because they don't take as long to pup, and they could potentially be having more pups. But they also have, unfortunately, they do really poorly in nets. So if they are caught, they have like the highest post-release mortality. So it's so that might even cancel each other out. We're yet to see. But then the other three species, they take longer and then they live a lot longer. So I believe Pebroll's paper projects greens to live around like 50 years, dwarfs potentially up to 80. But what you get is, you put all these models in your growth curves, and then you get like a asymmetric growth. So there's like a point where they really stop growing, but they could be getting older. So you see them get to this stage and you're like, oh, they could live longer and longer and longer, but we've never caught one that we know is that old. You know what I mean? So based on the models, yeah, anywhere between like 50 and 80 years, which is pretty cool, but yet to see one that old.
Very good. Lisa asked, can you explain how large sawfish are dying from line fishing and cast netting? Because they're pretty active in-person forms of fishing when they can be really quickly released by the fisher.
Hang on, I want to make sure I caught that right. So say that again. So large sawfish, because large sawfish are not being caught in cast nets.
Oh, really?
No,
yeah,
tiny.
I think she's talking about this one's.
Yeah. So just small ones. So that cast nets are gonna catch like absolutely tiny young year individuals, and then they're always released alive, and they're usually really cute videos from like, honestly, kids will send them in like, I'll get it back safely. It's like the sweetest thing ever. But then on a line, because it's cast net or line, you can catch larger individuals, and so again, it really depends on the person. So sometimes, yeah, you think they're not gonna like, they're not gonna be accidentally pulled out of the water and something will happen to them, like getting stuck in a net that goes dry, right? So there's no reason you shouldn't be able to release the animal alive, but people have definitely killed them. So, and we have had it reported to us, unfortunately. Yep.
So yeah, I think she's asking why there's a small amount dying that are larger in the second one. So it's just people mishandling them when they're getting caught.
Yep. Yeah, it's a big piece of it. So yeah, again, because I looked at pre and post protections, right? Before 2007, or 2009, you could kill them, right? And it wasn't illegal. So that would have included that. So that would have been when they were killing them. We're not seeing line fishers kill them now, luckily. Or if so, they're being reported dead, and their capture method is unknown. And so I don't have that in this analysis, which of course is something to consider. Absolutely.
Cool. We've got two really good questions from Joanna asking, how can the worldwide public be involved? And are there citizen science opportunities to be involved remotely?
Sure. Yeah. So if you're out, if you're a recreational fisher, if you got friends that are recreational fishers, absolutely, you can always report your sighting. That's the biggest one. But SARA does take interns. So we've got people that work on our historic data set. So going through and then collecting that and curating that so we can set those really important baselines. And then we've got social media. I know you, Barbara Sara is looking for more social media interns as well. So you can get involved that way if that's something that you're interested in. Yeah, there's a number. If you go to the website, there's lots of opportunities. I think SAR's also taking more students. You can see that all on the page.
Wonderful. And I've put the link in the comments as well for you, Joanna, if you're interested in that. Alice asked another question. My family wants to know why they have the teeth on the saw when it's so far from their mouth.
Yeah, so that's a cute question. So that's how they kill their food, right? So with their saw, their mouth is just, they've got a cute little ray mouth. I had an adorable video in here of one upside down. Oh yeah. You can still kind of see it here. But their mouth is like most non-aggressive thing you've ever seen. It's just for crushing things. So they have to use their saw to whack and stun their prey. So and as they found, like the closer it is to the edge, that gives you the most force behind it. So most of the impacts happen at the end of the saw. And then what'll happen is that poor animal, their prey will be stunned, and then they'll swim around and they'll gulf it. So they love catfish, they love mullet. If they're eating a catfish, this is from Barbara's work from her PhD. Really, really cool videos if you ever get to see one of her talks. They will actually spit out their catfish. If it's backwards, they'll go around and they'll eat it again. So yeah, they're not like a shark. They don't need to bite out of it. They stun it and then they eat it afterwards.
Very cool. I'm not sure if you know Laura Smith. Maybe you do.
Yeah, no, Laura.
She says we need to age them with DNA. Sounds like she's offering to age them with DNA.
Yes. Yes. What do you mean, Laura? I like side, but yes. We need to age them. Okay. Yeah. Can you age them? Can you age? This is a question for genetics people because I don't know things about this. Yeah. Can you do that with like older saws, or would it have to be a recently caught sawfish? I love it.
Yes, you can age things with DNA methylation.
Yes, but does it have to, like, I would love to be able to age them from just the saw, but is it too degraded to be able to do that?
I think it might be too degraded, but people have had luck with things in captivity of known age, and then using that to kind of calibrate, the DNA methylation.
Yeah.
So they've done it, I think, with some pretty long-lived species like Murray cod, and there was another one. So yeah, it'd be really cool to apply that to sawfish because we have no idea how old they get. But I think it's the same thing with those length ratios, is that the older things get, the less accurate the methods are as well, but be worth a try. Yeah.
I'm also looking at one of my other chapters. I don't know if I've talked to everybody on this call already about it, but I'm looking at the teeth. And I'm comparing that to the vertebra. So obviously, if you don't know already, you can age chondrichthyans with their verts and growth rings. So it'd be cool to look at the DNA methylation and the vertebra and the teeth all in one fun side project. So we can talk, Laura. Yeah.
Cool. Simone had a question about how did you involve citizens to report views of Sawfish? So maybe just go back to the slide you have about that.
Absolutely. With our displays. Yeah. So one of the big ones that we did was we set up these big display cases, and I can show you again with this because I had a ton of time on it. But yeah, this is a big one. That was a big campaign that started in 2018. So we really started ramping this up. So people know there's a little QR code. And this was actually COVID too. So that was one of the rare times where it helped. And all of a sudden everyone like sees a QR and they wanted to scan it. I wasn't expecting that to happen. But yeah, so you can submit your sighting, it takes you directly to the website. That's one. But a lot of our outreach honestly does it. So whenever we do a big talk, people will submit a sighting. Doesn't matter how old, we want it. We want to know about it, because that's really like, that's how you cover a massive geographical area, right? Like, is the people that are actually out there fishing. The caveat to that, of course, is that you don't get all the times people don't catch a sawfish, which makes it difficult.
Yeah, Bo had a question that he'd heard of a handful of sightings catches likely in Moreton Bay and the Gold Coast area over the years. Has there been many official sightings or photos from that area?
So, I didn't say that in the question. Yeah. So, I was pretty rigid with how I classified a confirmed sighting. So all of the ones that I've talked about today were ones that were confirmed with a photograph. So I did not include anything that people said was a sawfish because, like I said, people send stuff in like, that's a sawfish. It's like, actually, that's a lemon shark. You can tell from the photo, it happens all the time. So I've not seen a confirmed sawfish sighting south of Harvey Bay yet since 19, let's be specific here, 66. So if people have them, I need to see it. I would love to see it. We've had like commercial fishers send things in where I'm like pretty positive that there was one, but I mean, green sawfish used to be found historically as far south as Sydney, right? And the Brisbane River was a pupping ground for freshwater sawfish. So we know they absolutely used to be there, but they have been, due to habitat destruction and people, they've been fished out so long ago.
Wow. There you go, Bo. You need to go and find some photos.
Please, and submit them to our website. Submit them right here. And I follow up every single one of these. And I ask people a bunch of silly questions in my process to try and figure out how big each thing was. A lot of times people would send in photos and they'd have like their feet right next to it. There's no other scale. And I'd be like, hey, I know this is really weird, but can you tell me the size of your feet? So that I can estimate the size of the sawfish from this photo. So yeah, I love talking to fishers and hearing about their stories and finding out more about their catch.
And their foot size.
Yeah, I know. It's weird.
Yeah,
Sorry, I missed that question.
that's all
Um,
right. Jared's made a comment that if saw teeth are covered in enamel, it may help preserve the DNA.
Yeah, I mean the teeth definitely wear away. And then it depends on how, I mean, again, if you're talking about historic saws, it really depends on the preservation and what people do with it. So a lot of times, we get a lot of saws because it's sad, but a relative has passed away and then they found these old saws in their shed or something like that. And then they realize that they're very illegal to own. So then they'll surrender them. And we work with Queensland Fisheries, who donates all confiscated and donated rostra to Sharks and Rays Australia. So we have this massive data set of like almost 1,000 rostra. And so, yeah, it really depends on how people were keeping them. A lot of times people have it like on the shed wall or just like back in some corner. And if I feel like if we were going to look at DNA from that, it would be like likely to come out mostly spider or something like that. Yeah. So if it was in a perfect situation, maybe.
very interesting. Laura asked, do they also have dermal denticles?
Yeah. So the teeth are not real teeth. Rostral teeth are actually modified dermal denticles. So they're not teeth in the same sense, but I can still use them potentially in my aging study because they do not get remodeled over the course of their lifetime, like human bones do, which is pretty cool. So yeah, so if a tooth, and people ask this sometimes, although no one did, but I'm going to tell you anyway. If a sawfish loses a whole tooth, then that's it. It doesn't get that tooth back. But if it breaks part of the tooth, then it can keep growing. Yeah. As far as how they grow, we're still figuring that out entirely. Yeah.
That is super cool. Very, very cool. Well, I think that's it for the questions. Before we lose everyone, would whoever's interested in participating in a selfie like to turn on just your camera, and we'll take one last group selfie before we send you all on your Merry Tuesday evenings.
And can I just add in for those that are still with us that this will be up on the Reef Check Australia YouTube channel in a couple of days. And I'll also put the link up on our Facebook page for it.
Oh, sorry to hear you can't turn us on Joanna, but thank you very much for coming. You had some very great questions. And just to let you know, Nikki, she's dialing in from the Deep Aquarium, which I believe is in the UK. It says in her name. And she's been asking all these questions because she's got 2 green sawfish and want to know new ways on how visitors can get involved in conservation.
Cool. Yeah. So you have 2 green sawfish at the aquarium, you mean?
Yep.
Yes, we do.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a member of the guides, and we do have 2 green sawfish here at the Deep. And we're always promoting the conservation of green sawfish. We celebrate Green Sawfish Day. Sawfish Day, actually, International Sawfish Day. And apart from saying, like, don't avoid single-use plastics, that kind of standard conservation message for the oceans, there's not much we can say for the families to do, because families that can't travel to Australia to do here in the UK. So that's why I was asking, is there any remote opportunities for visitors to be involved, like Zooniverse, for example, sorting out your data, your sawfish data, your sawfish photographs. That way they'll be actively involved in your efforts. They'll be part of something bigger. Because that's what it's triggering, that passion on the visitors. It's what makes them care about the animal, and ultimately is what will make the animal survive, in a way to say it.
Definitely. Yeah, please get in touch. Pablo can send my contact details, or you can look us up on the website. All of it's there.
I'll speak to my supervisor as well, because as we celebrate this Sawfish Day, I'll speak to my supervisor if it's even possible for us to have a little bit of like a cooperation when we do our activities, our sawfish activities on that weekend with you, for example, and share your information of your research.
Yeah, thanks. We've got lots of materials on the website too. Like if you want like coloring pages or pamphlets or ID guide, it's all there. So anything you need.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I'm just ashamed that I can't take the selfie, but it says that the host won't let me turn my camera on.
Oh, let me see if I can help with that.
There we go.
Ah, wonderful.
Hi.
Sorry, it was us. It was me. All right. Well, say cheese, everyone, and smile. There you go. Kenley just heard an old camera click. Let me check that I got it. Wonderful. Assuming that everyone turned their camera on is happy to have that shared just on our local socials. I'm not going to put you on the New York Times or anything like that. But once again, thank you all so much for coming. And most importantly, thank you so much, Nikki, for that talk. That was super great. Like, that was really, really impressive. To kind of digest and translate some really wonderful scientific information to the general public. And it's really, really important research with a critically endangered species. So you're pretty much doing God's work.
Thanks. A lot of that really credit needs to go to Barbara, who's not here. So I am a student. She created this space for me. And honestly, I wouldn't be a PhD student if I hadn't started this internship. So if you guys are looking for important intern work, it's a good place to be. Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you, Barbara, and thank you, you guys, and thank you everyone for attending, including Winnie.
Yes, Winnie.
See you later.